Stephen Curry has had an illustrious career thus far, spanning 15 seasons with crazy achievements such as being a 4-time NBA champion, 2-time MVP, and also not enjoying low-income housing. Now that brings us to current day, where, things aren't going as well. Stephen Curry, as I said before, was born on the 14th of March 1988 to parents Dell and Sonia Curry in Akron, Ohio. Coincidentally, in the same hospital as my majestic, sweet, luscious Pookie Bear, King LeBron. Although he wouldn't spend much time in Ohio, as Dell Curry got traded before Steph's first birthday to the Charlotte Hornets, and North Carolina is where Steph grew up for most of his life. 2 years later, Sacramento Kings legend and Steph Curry's brother, Seth Curry, was born. And just one more time for y'all, Seth, not Steph. I know those names are hella close. Growing up surrounded by basketball, Curry eventually became a sheep to the herd and also began to play the sport. He loved the sport much growing up, but within his game, he had two major flaws. One being, even though his dad was a staggering 6'4", he wasn't as lucky, being only 5'6" in his sophomore season of high school. D1 schools thought Curry was absolutely cooked and couldn't see the scrawny guard adding anything substantial to this team. The second flaw of Curry's game was that he had a bad habit that is all too common of younger, weaker players, being a low release point in their jump shot. In Curry's case, it was below his chest. At higher levels of competition, that shit would not fly, and players will without a doubt send that shit into the stratosphere if they got a contest on it like they were prime Hakeem Olajuwon. So Dell and Steph had to work together for an entire summer in an attempt to rework the shot to be at head level when it was released. Curry was frustrated as all hell as he had to put up hundreds if not thousands of shots every day, every week to fix his jumper. He was about ready to crash out, and it almost brought him to the point of quitting basketball entirely. Luckily though, he persevered. Although Curry changed his jumper and developed an elite stroke behind the arc, he still wouldn't be offered by any D1 schools. Even growing to 6'2" wouldn't change anything about these D1 schools offering him. And by the end of his senior year, Curry was ranked the 300th player in his high school class. The only offer that was appealing to him in his eyes was a local D2 school called Davidson. So this enabled Curry to run what I like to call the current Wizards Jordan Poole offense, in which they just let Curry take whatever shots he wanted, as long as he made them sometimes. Luckily for Curry, they were going in. In fact, they were going in a lot. Curry, his freshman year at Davidson, averaged 21.5 points a game on 46, 40, 85 splits. Although his first game at Davidson, he played like he was oiled up. Pause. As he dropped a wild 13 turnovers. Stephen Curry was already locked in that year as he broke the NCAA tournament record for most threes made by a freshman, as well as breaking the total points record as a freshman for Davidson. His sophomore season though was when people started to take real notice of him, as he averaged 26 points on 48, 39, 89 splits. But the tournament of his sophomore year was where he really shined. Curry was the NCAA Jimmer Fredette before Jimmer. In the tournament, he averaged a wild 32 points per game while leading a D2 squad full of park randoms to the Elite 8. Curry was so great, in fact, even my glorious monarch took notice of him early on. Then, to end out Curry's collegiate career and dominance, he entered his junior year, where he averaged 29 points a game and led the NCAA in scoring for the whole NCAA. And remember, he had no D1 offers going into the NCAA. In 3 years, Curry went from a random in North Carolina to the premier player within college basketball, leading an irrelevant school to relevancy. But still, Curry had allegations to beat. Many top teams within the NBA draft did not like the prospect of drafting a shorter, skinnier guard, as he may have been bullied and not been able to succeed heavily within the physical NBA. And yeah, looking back on it, they were chiefing some heavy crack. Great heavens, they were wrong. But none of the 5 teams that passed on Curry regretted it more than the Timberwolves, as they had 2 picks to draft him with right before. And not only did they have 2 picks to draft him with, which they didn't use, but they drafted 2 other point guards before him. But hey, at least they're good right now, I guess. The Kings also passed up on Stephen Curry for a player who had a generational fall off. Shout out Tyreek Evans, which continued the Kings' common disaster class of the 2010s when it came to drafting players, besides of course DeMarcus Boogie Cousins and De'Aaron Fox. Anyways, time to move on to the actual NBA career part of this video. But before that, a word from our sponsor. Recently, scammers have been putting up triple doubles on susceptible internet users just looking to watch basketball or other leisurely activities on their devices. Data brokers have been known to sell data about you to companies regarding home addresses, phone numbers, and various other personal information you would never want to be leaked. They might even know that you, as a grown man, refer to hitting shots on the basketball court as stroking it. This is where Aura steps in. Aura simply identifies these data brokers and submits opt-out requests on your behalf so that they can stop blowing up your phone or whatever device they keep contacting you on. Aura is easily able to identify whether or not your passwords or other sensitive information has been leaked on the dark web, and they offer so much more than just a protection plan against your personal information. Aura offers VPN services as well as managing your child's device to make sure they're not using too much screen time or even checking your credit score. Aura does so much to protect you as well as your family, all at one affordable price that you can find by clicking the link in the description or in the first pinned comment of this video. So go to aura.com/rise to get your 14-day free trial and 63% off for their family plan, which is the best value for the new year. Again, thank you to Aura, and back to the video. Stephen Curry's rookie year was the 2009-10 season, which, if you were following the NBA at the time, you'd know the Warriors were sorry as hell that season and many seasons before it. People tend to forget that before Stephen Curry revolutionized this franchise, they were known as a bottom feeder of this league constantly, and they only had 3 rings outside of Stephen Curry's time, 2 of which were pre-segregation and 1 was in the 70s. So, for about 30 plus years, the Warriors were either abysmal or they barely made the playoffs and never made deep playoff runs within it. But to speak on Stephen Curry's actual rookie season, he led the team with 80 games played as the team was riddled with injuries. In those 80 games, he averaged 17.5 points as well as shooting 43% from 3, which honestly just shows how insane his efficiency was even early on. Except, this was a different NBA, and the insane efficiency didn't mean too much when he only averaged 2 3-point attempts a game, not to mention the offense was never running through him, but through Monte Ellis. But Curry still, without a doubt, had a substantial rookie year, as he was the Rookie of the Year runner-up because Tyreke Evans unfortunately peaked in his first year in the league. I seriously thought this man was going to be the Kings' future. Anyway, time to move on to Curry's sophomore season, the 2010-2011 season. Curry had a slight improvement in this season, as he averaged a point more and had jumps in his efficiency. This Warriors team in general also had a jump, as they went from winning 26 games the season prior to winning 36 games this season. The offseason of this season, though, would be the most important in Curry's entire young career, as the Warriors drafted a guard from Washington State with their 11th pick, and his name was Klay Thompson. This season would also see the introduction of Warriors' new head coach, Mark Jackson, who really built up this franchise. Stephen Curry's junior season would be the first time we've seen Stephen Curry decline within his career thus far, as he averaged less points, rebounds, and assists than any other year in his career. But this was due to one reason in particular, that being his injury history. Stephen Curry up to this point in his NBA career has had a prominent history of ankle injuries throughout it, and this year was the worst example of it, as he was only able to play 26 games due to it. A month after Curry's sophomore season ended, he had a surgery on his right ankle, and going into his junior year, only on the second game he sprained his ankle, which was the second time he sprained his ankle within the week. Persistent ankle injuries and a few strained tendons would hinder Curry's junior season and again limits him to only 26 games played, as I said before. On April 25th, 2012, Curry would undergo another procedure on his right ankle, in which the Warriors would announce that there was no structural damage to it and it only consisted of clearing out loose debris and scar tissue. Due to Curry's ankle injuries, the Warriors were able to get a steal of a contract for him, signing him to a 4-year, $44 million contract extension, which made certain things possible in the future. Another thing that Curry's ankle injury made possible was the trade of Monte Ellis for Andrew Bogut. Originally, the Warriors were planning on dealing away Stephen Curry for Andrew Bogut, but since the Milwaukee Bucks knew that Stephen Curry had a history of ankle problems, they didn't want him and decided that they only wanted Monte Ellis in exchange for Andrew Bogut. 2 more notable things that happened during the 2011-12 season was that the Warriors picked up Harrison Barnes with the 7th pick and then picked up Draymond Green with the 35th pick. Now it's time to talk about when everything changed for Stephen Curry, his 4th season in the NBA. In the 2012-2013 NBA season, Stephen Curry beat his ankle injuries to play 78 games and was finally the player for the Golden State Warriors now that they traded Monte Ellis, which allowed him to score 23 points per game and 7 assists a night on 45% from 3, now averaging a total of 8 attempts per game, which, if you couldn't tell, is straight up insane numbers given that volume. Not to mention, Curry beat the all-time record for 3-point makes in this season, and despite all this, somehow wasn't an all-star, which is actually ridiculous looking back on it, and is arguably the worst snub in NBA history. The Warriors won 47 games this year and were the 6th seed in the Western Conference due to having a better overall team, as Klay Thompson and Andrew Bogut were great additions for this team, as well as Harrison Barnes and Draymond Green providing useful minutes. They ended up facing the Nuggets in round 1, led by Ty Lawson, where Curry averaged 24, 9, and 4, and the Warriors handled them in 6 games. In round 2, the Warriors faced last year's champions in the Spurs, and in game 1, Curry exploded for 44 points and 11 assists in a double OT loss. From this point forward in the series, Curry's production started to slip, which eventually led to them losing in 6 games. Although the Warriors lost this year, it was a great year for Stephen Curry and the Warriors, as they finally got their foot in the door in a stacked Western Conference. So next year, the Warriors just need more of the same to compete. The next year, the Warriors were very similar, despite adding Andre Iguodala, who they defeated on the Nuggets last year. And now Andre Iguodala wanted to join the team that beat him. Surely this won't be a common occurrence with the Warriors. Anyways, the Warriors in the 2013-14 season improved to 51 wins, with Curry leading them, averaging 24, 8.5, and 4, and being a first-time All-Star. Although the Warriors improved and had more than 50 total wins, they were still the 6th seed in a stacked Western Conference. They ended up playing the Clippers in the first round, where the Warriors lost in 7 games. Curry slightly struggled in the series, but it was a series within reach, and still, unfortunately, they lost. Curry this next year, though, would come with vengeance. After the loss, the Warriors would bring in new head coach Steve Kerr ahead of the season, as well as snagging midi god Sean Livingston in the offseason. But now, it was time to move into the 2014-15 NBA season. Stephen Curry on that season averaged 24, almost 8, and 4 on 48, 44, and 91 splits. Although, what was most impressive is that the Warriors won 67 games. Oh my lord, this team was filthy. The Warriors' new system under Stephen Kerr was dominating in the league, and this only became more prevalent as the playoffs rolled around, as the Warriors, being the 1 seed, swept the Pelicans in round 1 before Anthony Davis became made of glass. Then the Warriors beat the Grizzlies in 6 games, and faced off against the Houston Rockets, where they won in just 5 games. This then led to the first of many finals matchups between the Golden State Warriors and the Cleveland Cavaliers, and the Warriors faced off against a Cavs team without Kevin Love and eventually without Kyrie Irving, as he got injured during the matchup. And despite a great performance from my king, the Warriors won in 6 games, and Curry got his first ring and his first MVP in the same season. Curry in the playoffs averaged 28, 6, and 5, and was without a doubt the reason the Warriors won the finals. Anyways, to move on to Stephen Curry's 2015-16 year, it can't be said enough how great he was this year, as he shot 50, 40, 90 on 30 points per game, as well as dropping about 7 assists a game and 5.5 rebounds. Mind you, this is all while leading his team to the greatest NBA record of all time. This season is arguably the greatest NBA season of all time by a singular player, and I'm not personally saying it's the greatest of all time, but you can definitely make the argument for it. Other than that, Stephen Curry broke a multitude of records, the first important one being he was the first ever unanimous MVP in this season, which was obviously well deserved, as there's no other case he could have made for any other player that year. Stephen Curry also beat the record for most 3-point makes in a season at 402, beating his record from seasons prior, and it's a record that stands today. Moving on to the playoffs for this year, the Warriors actually made it all the way into the finals, in which they had a hard-fought series against the Cleveland Cavaliers, where they actually lost in 7 games, but it was a very close series and nothing too crazy happened. Oh, you best believe if this was a LeBron video, I'd be glazing right now. With the Warriors losing to the Cavs in 7 games, but also having the greatest NBA record of all time, they really didn't need to add much to their team. But they still did. The Warriors already had the greatest regular season team of all time, and decided to add a top 3 consensus player on top of that in Kevin Durant, because he still heard Mike Breen yelling, "Bang! Bang!" in his ear. I think that kept him up at night. In the season following, after the Warriors acquired Kevin Durant in the offseason, Stephen Curry averaged 25, 6.5, and 4.5. And this team would win a championship, but with Kevin leading the team in the finals, Stephen Curry would be without a finals MVP yet again. This was also the case in 2017-18, as Curry had very similar production, averaging 26, 6, and 5, and they won the championship at the end of it all, but Curry again didn't take home the finals MVP after the Warriors dominated the Cavs with their star-studded roster. This then brought the allegations of Curry not being a great playoffs player and not showing up when it counts the most, which just isn't true at all. Anyways, moving on to the 2018-19 season, this is where things really changed for Stephen Curry and for the Warriors. Stephen Curry this season averaged 27, 5, and 5, with a playoff run that saw the Warriors going to the finals, but with KD getting injured throughout it. KD came back in Game 5, but ruptured his Achilles briefly into the game, which really lost a lot of hope for the Warriors. Then, down 3-2 going into Game 6, Klay Thompson would then tear his ACL, which then led to the Warriors losing in 6 games against the Toronto Raptors. Going into the offseason, it was a massive reset for the Warriors, as they lost arguably their best player in Kevin Durant going to another team, but they brought in a new piece being D'Angelo Russell. So the Warriors thought they were going to be able to retool and refire and get straight back into contending, but that's not what happened. Curry broke his hand very early into this season, and it was pretty much a wash for the Warriors going into it now. The Warriors became the worst team in the league by a decent margin, and it led them to getting a top pick, which didn't amount to much. The following season, the Warriors were much of the same, although they did improve to the 9th seed, but that's a given because Curry was back this season, and he had his highest scoring season of his entire career so far, averaging 32 points, 6 assists, and 5.5 rebounds. Ultimately, they did lose to the Grizzlies in the play-ins though. This season did see Curry breaking a record though, as he broke the all-time 3-point make records, which was previously held by Ray Allen. This was monumental for Curry, as it goes all the way back to when he was practicing shots with his dad in the backyard, just trying to make something out of himself and be the best player he could be, and now he's the greatest shooter of all time and has the records to prove it. Still, there's a void within Curry's career. he never got the finals MVP and was always overshadowed by someone else on his playoff runs. So he had to make something out of himself. And a lot of the media thought he couldn't do this. They thought the Warriors' 3 title runs were over. They were going to get 3 titles and that was going to be it. But the Warriors and Stephen Curry had other plans. Stephen Curry on the season averaged 25.5, 6, and 5, leading the Warriors to the 3rd seed within the Western Conference. Stephen Curry in that playoff run averaged 27.5 points, 6 assists, and 5 rebounds to lead the Warriors to the finals, in which they would beat the Celtics. Stephen Curry then won his 4th ring and his first ever finals MVP with many clutch performances, and the season in total was crazy. And if you want to know how crazy it was, I recommend watching the video that's on the screen right now. They do a great job breaking it down and just showing how crazy and spectacular the season from the Warriors was, as well as Stephen Curry's perspective on it. Moving on to the 2022-23 season for the Warriors, Stephen Curry averaged about 30 points per game, 6 assists, and 6 rebounds, in which they faced the Kings in the round 1 as the 6th seed, and they beat them in 7 games, where Stephen Curry decided to drop a 50 piece on my Kings. I'm still mad. But then they lost to the Lakers, so it is what it is, and that about catches us up to modern day where, yeah, things aren't going that well. But if this really is the downfall of the Warriors, at least we have Stephen Curry's monumental career to look back on.